Welcome to Stuff They Didn't Teach Me in Sunday School. My aunt had a friend who raised foxtrotter horses. And when I was a teenager and even a young adult, used to go down to the farm in central Missouri and ride those foxtrotters. He had one named Ladies Man. That horse had an arched neck, a beautiful prance. When it got into foxtrot, it was like sitting in a rocking chair. The horse had won some national awards. One lady offered her Buick in exchange for the horse one day at a horse show, and I got to ride that horse. When I rode that horse, I felt like $1 million. That horse was just the envy of everybody around. When kings came to visit a city, especially if they came in war or came coming back from war, they rode horses, and they rode proud horses, and they rode war steeds outfitted for battle. Jesus was not the first person to ride an animal through the gates into the city of Jerusalem. That had been done many, many times. He was not the first king to ride an animal into the city of Jerusalem. But most often, it was the power and glory of a king on a horse. You know that Palm Sunday story in Mark chapter 11. It's the story of Jesus entering into Jerusalem. What you may not have learned in Sunday school was the significance of riding that donkey. Jesus comes in as a king, but not as a conquering king, not as a warrior king, but as a servant king, riding not a war steed, not a stallion, but riding a donkey. Whether the people get that or not at the time, I'm not sure. At the end of that, as Jesus is riding in, at the end of that section, Mark's Gospel, verse 9, it says, chapter 11, verse 9, "Those who went out before and those who followed cried out, 'Hosanna! Blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord. Blessed is the kingdom of our father David that is coming. Hosanna in the highest.'" I suspect that in spite of riding a donkey instead of a horse, that those people are still seeing Jesus as the Messiah who's going to lop off some Roman heads and establish a new Israelite kingdom in downtown Jerusalem. And that as he rides into that city, that's what they're seeing. They're seeing the new David. They're not seeing a king who later that same week would spread out his hands, have them nailed to a cross, and die on that cross for the sins of the world. After he gets off of that donkey, after the parade, he walks in, looks at the temple, and then walks back and stays with his friends Mary, Martha, and Lazarus out of Bethany. The next morning he comes in from Bethany. On the way in, there's a strange story. He sees a fig tree. When he came to it, he found nothing but leaves, for it was not the season for figs. Well, in the springtime you would not see figs yet, but you would see evidences of figs to come. So evidently he's not seeing that. And he said to it, "May no one ever eat fruit from you again," and his disciples heard it. Now that sounds like an insignificant story to tell, and why would he curse a tree? But that's what he does. He curses the fig tree. Then he goes into the temple, and in the temple he sees all of this activity. Well, verse 15, "They came to Jerusalem, entered the temple, began to drive all those who sold, those who bought in the temple, and overturned the tables of the money changers and the seats of those who sold pigeons. And he would not allow anyone to carry anything through the temple." In other words, to use the temple as a shortcut from one side of town to the other. The temple was now serving not necessarily an agrarian society anymore, in some cases an urban society. It's Passover time. Jerusalem swells from 50,000 people to probably about 500,000 people at Passover time, and some of these people are coming from all over the place. They're required to bring in a lamb for sacrifice. They're required to pay their temple tax. They cannot pay their temple tax with Roman coinage because it has the emperor's head on it. So they've got to trade their Roman money for temple money, and the money changers in the temple are serving that purpose. And the second thing they have to do is they have to buy a lamb, because they've got to sacrifice a lamb, and a lot of these people aren't living on farms. And so they've got to buy the lamb. So there's livestock there. Now this commerce should have been done outside the temple walls. Instead, it's done inside the temple walls. It's not done in the part where only Jews can go, but it's done in the part where Gentiles can go. So the only place that a Gentile can encounter the God of Israel is all cluttered up with lambs and sheep and animals and people making deals, and it looks more like a marketplace than a place of worship. And Jesus will not tolerate that. He cleanses the temple. You know about that part of the story. What's interesting is the arrangement of stories. Cursing of the fig tree, cleansing of the temple, and now when they go back by the fig tree the next day, the fig tree in verse 20 is withered away to its roots. I wonder if that positioning of the stories doesn't tell you something. He sees a fig tree that has all this activity, all this evidence of life in it, all this activity with the leaves growing. Have you ever seen a fig tree? Huge leaves and thick vegetation in a fig tree. And that's what he sees, but no evidence of fruit bearing. He walks into the Jerusalem temple. He sees all this activity, all this evidence that something's going on there, all this busyness, but no fruit being born. And the next day, the fig tree is withered away. Is that temple, at that point in history, similarly useless? Is that what he's trying to tell his people? Jesus' authority is then challenged in the end of chapter 11, and that's just the beginning of this conflict section that's coming ahead of us that we'll get at in future stuff lessons. So hang in there. We're working our way through the Passion story. We are getting to know a Jesus who's going to lay down his life for his people.